Now, does God force his way on us? We're going back to that ancient Bible story of the prophet Daniel. Taken as a young captive lad across there to Iraq, does God force his will on human beings? Sarah, what do you reckon? What does the story tell us?
No, he doesn't.
Okay.
Definitely not. Last week we saw King Nebuchadnezzar.
Yep.
He became sick. He turned around and he asked God for help, and God helped him out of that. So he definitely doesn't force himself on us at all. The decision is ours, whether we ask or not for that help.
Okay, but someone could argue from last week's study that, man, look, Nebuchadnezzar got mentally ill.
Yeah.
God was involved in the equation somehow, poor Black, and poor Nebuchadnezzar. And so
Yeah.
God forced himself on Nebuchadnezzar.
No, it was a consequence of the decisions he had made.
Okay.
I mean, you look at his life, he didn't live a life that exactly was going to lead to a healthy mind. His mind went as a result of that, but God was there for him to ask for help at the end of it.
Now, he had a grandson. That's today's story.
Yes, he had a grandson, Belshazzar, who probably made really bad decisions, and you saw the consequence of his decision at the end. So it's a story of how ancient Iran was coming to attack ancient Iraq. And during this process, instead of preparing for battle, you see Belshazzar deciding he's going to have a good old party, he's going to drink a whole lot of stuff, and invite everyone there to drink with him. So there he is, getting drunk, while he should be preparing for battle.
Mind you, getting roaring drunk surrounded by his harem girls, but then again, he's about to lose his life, isn't he?
Yes. I mean, was it worth the risk? It was a consequence for his decisions, definitely.
Okay, so he made some pretty bad choices. Did God kill him?
No, he didn't.
Okay.
He made his choices. There was an army surrounding the city, and God was the only one who could have rescued him out of that situation. And yet, like Sarah said, he mocked God. And so, like, God doesn't force himself on people. He had to respect Belshazzar's decision. And so I guess God allowed it to happen, but it was actually the soldiers that came in and from Iran.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. and killed him.
Yeah.
And it says that in chapter 5 and verse 30, that very night Belshazzar, king of the Chaldeans, was slain.
If there was ever a time Belshazzar needed God, I tell you, it must have been that night then, surely. And instead of asking God for help, he's just having a roaring party and he's mocking God.
Yeah.
Yeah, tell us a bit about it, Neil.
Well, it's an interesting story. Obviously, you know, we've got the whole scenario here of a battle scene, the surrounding armies surrounding Babylon. He thought Babylon was an impregnable fortress. It had these monstrous walls, had gates, the river came through, they could handle a siege for years. They could even grow their crops inside. And in the midst of this, he decides to throw this giant party, and in the party, while it's raging around, he calls for all of the implements that he'd captured from the Israeli temple. And so he brings that out, and he's celebrating, he's drinking with all of those things. In the midst of this drunken festivities, this mysterious handwriting appears on the wall. And I love this little bit of the story. In Daniel 5, verse 6, I want to read it for you. Then the king's countenance changed when he saw the handwriting on the wall. And his thoughts troubled him so that the joints of his hips were loosened and his knees knocked against each other. That's secret code for he crapped himself. Because that's actually what it says in the Hebrew. Because his bowels let go, literally is what the Hebrew says. And he just couldn't handle it.
It's embarrassing, even if you're drunk.
Even if you're drunk and you're the king, and he's so panicked that he just lets it rip. I love how earthy the Bible gets sometimes. And then, you know, he calls out and he's confused, he's not sure what. And then he remembers his mother, his queen mother remembers. Daniel, get Daniel, he'll tell you what it means. And so you bring in Daniel, and it's many tekel upharsin. You've been weighed in the balance, you've been found wanting, and this night your kingdom will be given to the Persians.
Okay, so why did he ask Daniel? Who's Daniel?
Well, Daniel is a Hebrew young man. He was a prisoner, he'd been emasculated, he was a prime minister of Iraq, and now he's an old man, and he's about to become the prime minister of Iran. And he's called because he was a person who loved God. He had God was part of his regular life. He asked God for protection and help on a regular basis. He was wealthy, admired, respected, and humble. And most importantly, I'll just read what it says actually in verse 11. It says, "There is a man in your kingdom who has the spirit of the holy gods on him. In the time of your father he was found to have insight and intelligence and wisdom like that of the gods." You know, that's an amazing description of a man who walked very closely with God.
Yeah, okay. I wonder what Belshazzar thought of Daniel, though.
Well, he knew about Daniel. He knew about his father and grandfather, Nebuchadnezzar, how Nebuchadnezzar had actually become converted to follow Daniel's God. And so he actually went to Daniel for help to interpret the events of the writing on the wall.
And Daniel did so.
And Daniel did, very accurately.
And what did Daniel say? I mean, this is good, but what did he say? You alluded to it before.
Well, I did. But as he comes out, he actually reminds Belshazzar of all of the events of his father and his grandfather and their experience with God. And then we get down to this lovely verse, verse 22, and it says, "But you, his son," or grandson, if you want to think of it in terms of that as well, from Nebuchadnezzar, "Belshazzar, have not humbled your heart, although you knew all this." So, hey, you knew that God is real. You knew that he had the power to do all these things. You knew that he was a special God, different from all your Babylonian things. And bingo, you still went ahead and had your drunken party and everything else.
Neil, this point really hit home pretty powerfully to me. I started to think about it, and I started to think, wow, what could Belshazzar have done? He'd never asked God for help, did he?
No.
And he could have.
He could have actually asked God for help, and had he have humbled himself, I believe that God would have actually turned the tables.
Or maybe Babylon would have been conquered, but he kept his life.
Yeah.
Because he got killed that night.
He did.
Yeah, okay. Who knows? It's a fascinating tale about how God can help in any circumstance whatsoever, isn't it?
Definitely. God can help in any circumstance. All we need to do is ask. And that's a big lesson in comparison between Nebuchadnezzar last week and looking at Belshazzar this week.
Now, Marie had a fascinating tale before, didn't you, about how God helps you in a tiny matter. How have you found God, just briefly?
Well, God helps us in all circumstances. There's a really neat verse that I want to read from Ephesians. Ephesians chapter 3 and verse 20. "Now to him who is able to do exceedingly abundantly above all that we ask or think, according to the power that works in us." So more than we can ever imagine.
You know, for thousands of years, people have believed that there is a real God who's able to help us in the small parts of life as well as the large things in life.